Call to order. Any guests, any public comment? Seeing none. Approve the minutes, CPC, March 14th, 2019. I have a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from March 14th, 2019.
Second.
Okay, motion and second, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion approved, okay. We're going to change the agenda a little bit, and we're going to go to Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate being taken out of order again. I do have another commitment, so I try to do that only when I have another town commitment. So I have FinCom at 6:30. So I was requested, and hopefully I have the full request here, to update the CPC on the Article 30 of 2016, which was the Albro House Ramp Access Project. And then the second one was Article 50 of the 2018 Albro House Status Assessment for $2,500. So I'll just take them in the order. So on the CPC Article 30, 2016, there was $18,700 that was appropriated. I think I sat here that night that the original request was pared down. I guess the good news is that we were kind of able to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish with the 18.7, but it didn't cover what needed to be covered. So what was approved versus what had to be done within the money was not able to be done. So what we did, I actually kind of helped on this project. And you know, it's funny, I was thinking today as I was writing this material, this project started off with Dave Spitz. It was then referred to Bob Caffarelli, and then ultimately Sean Libby did some of it, and I think we only have one out of those three that are left. So when you go through these transitions, it sometimes becomes a little bit problematic because the project manager gets changed throughout. On this, and now it's in the hands of Charlene to oversee it. Charlene would be here tonight, but she's had some medical issues that she's out for a little bit, so that's why you have me pinch hitting. The majority of the work was completed. She has two items that were left to be done, cut out and install 8 brackets on the new side porch, and then apply a skid-resistant surface to the ramp. So there are two. Mr. Eldridge, also retired, who was actually doing the work, and then we did bring him back to do some of this. So I will make an effort to, and I did CC the email to Sean Libby, to have Sean Libby go and make sure we finalize the work. What I was kind of getting at is when I met with Bob Caffarelli on the ramp, he wanted to do a back and forth ramp. If you ever see these industrial buildings, you'll see how they have a slope where they go up and down, and every time you go up, you have to have a platform, and then you have to go up and have a platform. And I said, you know, Bob, I don't think that aesthetically is going to look good for a historic building. So we did work something out, what you see out there now, that we were able to extend the ramp and have the dedicated parking place that's handicapped next to the handicap ramp. None of that pavement was included in this. So all the work that was done, I believe all the plantings that were done on there to kind of mask the ramp was all paid for out of separate funds from DPW. So I just want to make sure that, you know, and that's really, I guess, on us, that when Dave Spitz did it, he should have had a better estimate. I did find out what he did. I do try to follow up on things so we don't try to repeat mistakes. But what he did was he got an estimate from an outside source. And he really should have used Bob Caffarelli or an estimate from an inside source that's a little bit more familiar. I've been trying to have Sean do more of this type work. So the good news is the project is almost done. Just minor work that needs to be completed on it. And I think overall it's come out pretty well. My office is right there, so I can see people do use the ramp, and it's getting used in an appropriate manner. If there's any questions on that, I'm happy to take. We did provide the print-off of all the work that was done by contractor.
Kathy?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, were the interior doors done?
Yes. Yeah, and one of the work that we did, which I don't think was in part of the original, but again, you know, if you're going to do something, you might as well do it. And the bathroom needed to have some changes made to it, so it would be handicapped accessible. So we had doors, so you could literally take a wheelchair and make your way into the facility, but then you couldn't go to the bathroom because it wasn't handicapped accessible. So we did do the door jams around the handicapped accessible toilet, so the bottom floor has a handicapped accessible toilet too.
John? Chris?
No, no
Randy?
questions.
Questions?
Mary?
Nothing from me.
Excellent. The second one is on the Albert House again. This one, Charlene is working on it. In some ways, I'm appreciative that she didn't make as much progress as she had intended, and I'll explain myself. In Article 50 of 2018, the original intent was to go in Albert House right now, and it has been a source for 5.5 years of the selectmen not really finalizing what they want to do with the building. So it has been a quasi-office building. We have one town operation in there, the youth counselor, and then we basically rent out rooms on a weekly or monthly basis to different types of social services enterprises. So it is used as a light office building now. The original intent was to have a review of the building done to see what improvements need to be made to it so it can be sustainable. I'd like to say, you always want people want to say, oh, it'll last 100 years, 50 years. To me, you try to do things for a reasonable, useful life. So in my mind, that's probably 25 to 30 years for a building of that nature. Subsequent to this article being adopted, we have formed the Affordable Housing Trust, and the trust does have this on one of their parcels, one of their parcels for consideration to be converted from general municipal use to potentially affordable housing. What difference does that make? Quite honestly, by having it be an office building, we had just a bathroom on the second floor that was just a toilet and a sink, and then a bathroom on the first floor that was just a toilet and sink. And if we wanted to convert it back into housing, we would have to reactivate the bathroom upstairs. There actually is an old shower, or actually an old tub that was up there. It's an older house. So if we want to have it for residential purposes, I think the review would be a little bit different than it would be for light office or a small office space. So I would like to get a kind of a full understanding of which direction we would like to go. If town meeting in May approves the list of properties and says, yes, that Albert House, using that as affordable housing makes sense, then it would make sense to do a housing study to have that house be converted back into a house. If they're not in favor of that and they want to use it, continue to use it as light office, then we would continue to use it as light office space. So nothing's really been done on that for that reason. We're trying to get a sense for a better sense of direction for where we're going to ultimately see that building go.
To the board. Chris?
So the June 29, 2019 completion date that's referenced in here is sort of just waiting at this point.
I think that what the plan would be is to kind of target, to have some lineup contractors to come in and do the work, or inspectors to do the work, but wait for town meeting. And if town meeting would hopefully only 2 nights. I'd love to have 1 night, but the record here has been 2
Not
nights.
gonna happen.
So, I think once we know on May 7th, after town meeting, we'll have a better sense, and if it's gonna be used for housing purposes, the selectmen obviously know that that was one of the parcels that we considered to use for housing purposes, and they did support that. I think it was actually a 4-to-1 vote, I don't believe it was unanimous. But I think that it makes more sense to, instead of doing it for light office, we would do it for housing. So we'd probably hire more of a housing expert than a building expert.
So the June date is still viable?
I'd like to try to hold
Fairly.
myself to that.
Okay.
No need to delay anymore. We've delayed long enough.
Okay.
Randy?
Questions?
John?
So, what would the impact on the town be if Arbor House was no longer available for town office space? Is that a consideration at all here? Would
Oh, yeah.
Would there be a problem with office space for the town?
I don't believe so. The office space that she currently has, the youth commission, and that's really the only town operation that we have in there, is one person that does counseling. So she needs office space to be able to conduct counseling sessions. So the approach that I would recommend is, and I know she's expressed, Sheila House, that maybe find an off-site location, or we could find another location within town operations. So, for instance, we have had some discussions that potentially we could move her into town hall and shift things around a little bit in town hall, or potentially see if she wanted to move over to the community center. The one thing about that operation that I have a high level of sensitivity to this, you have kids that are coming in that, you know, have some social anxiety and such. So we need to be very thoughtful about making sure that we don't create a adverse condition for people to come in. So I'd like to
Chris,
give her
that really
some
doesn't have anything to do with this application.
I think the point is, on the reuse of the building, if it was to be used for housing purposes, where would we relocate the existing operation? I mean, that's what I took it as the question.
Maybe it's a long topic, and I apologize.
That's okay, that's okay. Kathy?
Just a quick question. The original application, the scope of the work was for the existing condition assessment and evaluation.
Correct.
So if the town meeting votes to move forward the Albro House as a potential site for community housing, affordable housing, it seems like that assessment would change. It would be at least a more comprehensive assessment, because it's not going to be just what the existing conditions are, but what we need to do to turn it into housing. So it seems like the scope is going to change. Do you foresee a lot more money being spent on the assessment?
Yeah, my initial.
It sounds like it's going to be a different assessment, is what I'm saying.
Just if you look at what she had in here, you know, basically review the site plan.
Yeah, this is all the
building
stuff that was in
envelope.
our original application.
I think a lot of those elements are core parts of the building.
Mm-hmm.
I think if it was to be overtly more expensive for housing, my understanding is generally housing inspections tend to be a little cheaper than business inspections. So at least that's kind of the feedback I got when we started to research this originally. If there is additional work that needs to be done for housing, then I would say that the Housing Trust should be given consideration to ask to fund those additional dollars that would be needed. But we could keep this to the building envelope, which I think is really CPC's domain, because it's a historic structure. But we could separate that out.
Mary?
So my only question was, has the Housing Trust already decided that, yes, if this was available, that they would want to put housing there yet? Or what status does this parcel have at the trust level? Or is this just that town meeting is voting to transfer it, and then the trust will look at it?
I believe, if I have this right, that when we had a discussion at the trust, it's a little bit tough because I'm going as an administrator with the selectmen and as the trust, but I believe the trust had a list of all properties that we wanted to evaluate for purposes of moving over for affordable housing.
Yeah.
And this was on the list, so the list was approved overall by the trust.
Okay.
And I think that's what we presented to Real Estate and Open Space, all the properties. So the intent is to have it be reviewed for this purpose.
So, just as a follow-up, so the trust it hasn't been evaluated yet, because this hasn't been done yet, the existing conditions, so we don't know what the scope of the work that would need to be done to bring it up to housing standards to be able to rent it out as affordable housing yet.
Yeah, I think
And you would
that's-
wait until after a town meeting to actually
do that
do
work.
that.
Yes.
Yeah,
And I
but
think
that's-
part of it is, the transfer of the properties was always intended to just move from general municipal use to trust. We are lining up to have Mass Housing Partnership, the state agency, come in and do an evaluation. So that would be, the trust would pay somebody to do an evaluation on what it would take to have that become affordable.
So I guess from my perspective, what then happens if we find out that it's too much, it's gonna cost way too much money to feasibly put, 1 or 2 units in this building versus the trust decides to use the money and put money towards another project, then that's been designated for affordable use. Would the trust then transfer it back to general,
Mary,
then seek next year?
Excuse me for a moment. You're getting way ahead of what this application is. This
I understand
application specifically is to do an assessment on Albro House for the town.
Outside structure. of
Has
the
nothing
core
to do with the
structure.
trust. The trust shouldn't even be involved in this. We're looking at this specific application. And if it can't meet this application, the money should be returned to CPC, and then a new application should come forward. These are all extenuating circumstances that town meeting's gonna decide. That's my concern. Anybody else? Okay,
Thank you.
thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. Okay, next. Some housekeeping here. I have a request from Sandy Robinson, and this is, Chris was, this is for a public board class that I've had Jan forwarded to all of you folks to see if anybody would be available to take the specific time. And it's at 9 o'clock in the morning, I believe.
What day?
Sorry, what is it again?
It's
I thought it was
May
a Tuesday
14th,
night.
2019,
I thought it was a Tuesday night.
5 to 8 p.m.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I have a planning board meeting, so.
I haven't emailed it because we're just getting this.
We're just getting this, yeah.
We'll be getting an email at the end of the meeting, when I get home.
So if I may, I think it is a seminar that is to
Tuesday.
bring local board members up to speed on what your kind of fiduciary duties are and your rights and responsibilities are with respect to serving as a town employee, as a, member of a board or commission. So,
Did you write this?
I did not, however, I
Just
have read it
curious.
already, so.
I read it already too, because I got one from
Okay,
real estate.
so everybody did get one then?
No,
I-
I got it.
I
I
was
got it from my
unaware
other
of it.
committee.
I got it as a chair of real
Okay,
sales.
all right.
And I did as
Okay.
well.
All right, fair enough.
This is the thing in Katuitt or somewhere like that?
Yeah, where
Yes.
is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
I
It's
heard
on-
about
it's
it
actually on Cape, yes.
Conservation, yes.
Falmouth Road, Centerville, Mass.
It's an
Route 20,
opportunity for,
Fire headquarters.
to go to
Right.
something like this locally, basically.
Absolutely.
Um,
It sounds like it would be a good program to bring people up to speed on what your kind of duties and responsibilities are. I unfortunately have a planning board meeting that night, so.
This is something
cannot
that
be in
you just got
attendance.
this afternoon, late this afternoon, right?
Yeah, this is just his, I don't know how
Earlier
these.
this week,
I got
Yeah.
mine this week, yeah.
yeah.
So,
I'm always curious how these emails just drift and.
It
Well,
depends
if
on-
if
it depends on
anybody-
when he read his email.
anybody has
No.
the availability,
Yeah, if anybody's
Chris.
interested in going.
would you let the secretary know, please?
I will respond to the email when it comes out.
All right. Moving on. All right, we'll address the informational flyer now.
Did you see it?
I did.
What'd you think?
It's beautiful.
Beautiful.
Oh, look. Wow.
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah. And in record time.
Look at that.
Look at that.
Oh, I am totally impressed, folks. I like this.
Thank you.
Yeah, you
I
guys are
do.
amazing.
I think it turned out okay for our first.
Absolutely.
See, this I have read already, and again, I think the subcommittee did a hell of a job on it.
I think
It's
they did as
outstanding.
well.
It really is.
And I like the dual use of the town seal.
The dual use?
Yes, it's on the front in color and on the back in black and white. I like it.
town seal in yellow,
I like it.
when Anita said she'd only seen it in black and white.
I like it.
So did you color it?
No, the woman I
The computer did.
helped with
The computer
typesetting, no,
did.
she had the
The
colors
color.
of the seal. She
Oh,
had
yeah.
it,
That's fantastic.
yeah.
I think
That's
the only
Any
shock,
comments?
I think the only shocking thing about it is how quickly it got done.
I know, I agree, I agree.
Which,
So,
you're not shocked about your own rapid work,
No,
are
it's
you?
about
Because you knew you could do that.
No, I meant,
Which part of it
I
are you
meant the,
shocked about?
I meant the local bureaucracy.
Oh, just getting sign-offs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we got the pictures, we did it, boom, boom, boom. Person I worked with in Barnstable was great. She took it to the printers, she got it printed in like days.
nice. Now, may I?
Mary?
Have you gotten in touch with Mike Ford about passing?
Yeah.
It's all taken care
Sorry, Mary. We didn't print
Fantastic.
this until we got permission.
I
of. It's all
love it.
taken care of.
Well, I mean, this is perfect for then and just
Yeah.
to have downstairs too.
Right.
Now,
For
are
people
you,
to pick up.
are you volunteering to come to town meeting and,
I will be working
Oh.
town meeting, so
well, you
I
can
won't be,
still,
I won't be available to pass them out front.
So we'll need everybody,
bodies.
yeah.
So what is,
To the board.
what's your notion about how they get
Okay,
passed
so
out?
I thought that, can I speak?
Go ahead, have at it.
Okay, so I thought that we would, you know how people pass out information before you go into
Right.
town meeting? So I thought we could pass them out there. I don't think we should do them on night two, because I think everybody that comes on night one, whoever comes on night two has already been there on night one. We don't really get somebody new coming in. We only printed off 1,000 copies, for our first run. We didn't put anything in here that was date specific, so that we could update it or, you know, whatever. Yeah, I think
great.
the pictures are great, I think, I love it.
It came out well. It really
The
did.
colors came out great too.
Came out nice.
Did you pick the colors because of the colors of the seal?
Yeah.
Looks fantastic. It really
Did you get an
does.
invoice yet?
No. My favorite part is the taxpayer's copy, though, that indicates where your CPA thing is.
Where you see it.
Yes, that's my favorite part.
Comments, questions?
Kudos to the subcommittee for putting it together so quickly and doing such a great job. And I really think I have to comment, I think the picture of Brooks Park is particularly, not Brooks, White House Field is perfect, especially because that's on one of our items this year. I think that's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. Yeah, the barn. barn looks
Fantastic.
Good.
I think it's
So,
fantastic.
I think we need whoever's gonna be available to come and hand out stuff. It would just be before the meeting. Nobody would miss the meeting.
When is the meeting?
The meeting is May 6th,
At 7 PM.
7 PM, and people start coming at probably 6:15, Mary?
Yeah. Because we usually have workers there to
Yeah.
start checking people in
Right.
around 6 o'clock.
And you can only hand things out outside the gymnasium door, correct?
I would say either outside the gymnasium door or outside the double doors coming into the building. I'm not sure which of the
Well, I've
two.
been handed stuff like before I went into the gym.
I would say that, I would say that that would be the moderator's call as
Yeah.
to where you can be.
He just said, he looked it over, approved it,
Yeah.
said, go ahead and take the ball.
Okay,
So, and I contacted Carolyn, she doesn't have an issue, so
Yeah.
wherever we choose to, we can hand it out.
yeah, you wouldn't want to be near the check-in, that's all.
Well, no, I mean, we'd only want to be at the double doors going
Yeah.
into the gym, because
Yeah.
after people have already checked in then and gotten
Absolutely.
their things.
Yeah.
So we only really need 2 people probably, right, do you think? 2 or
There's
3?
two sets of doors.
To go into the gym?
Yeah, there's two
Yes,
sets of
there's 2
doors.
sets of doors to go into the gym. There's
Oh,
one
right,
on each,
right,
on the
right.
corner there. So, 2 people could probably do it.
Yeah,
Sign me up.
yeah, I mean, I'll be there.
So
So at the
Question.
outside double
Yes.
doors?
No, the double doors going into
is
the
the
gymnasium.
restriction on
That's
handing
what
stuff
I just
only
mentioned.
outside does that also apply to things that are town business? I mean, this
It's
is
not
not like
the
some.
town, it's the moderator's town meeting. I've got his approval to hand that out
No, you mean
at
for
his town
other,
meeting.
No, but you're talking about a restriction about only being able to hand things out outside of the meeting. I'm just asking if that applies even for material that is.
no, no,
If
no,
it's
no.
political, no.
No, no, no. I think what you're saying is that this can be available in the town clerk's office.
No, I'm saying, why couldn't, I mean, I'm not advocating for doing this, I'm just trying to understand the situation. Why couldn't someone just walk down the aisle as the meeting is getting together? Why do you have to
Because it's a
stand
polling,
out?
because it's really a polling place. It's no
Yeah.
different than any other voting location.
Right.
So,
See, and
I don't know of
it
any,
seems like- oh,
I don't know of any
I see,
um,
okay.
paperwork or anything like that ever being passed out inside
Right.
the location.
Yeah, typically we get stuff from the Harwich Conservation Trust when
Right.
they're proposing
Right.
a land acquisition. They are outside. I don't know what else we get either.
I don't either.
Yeah.
I would tend to look at it more like.
And I would
the
say for
voting
anybody
location
who's
stuff.
doing the handing out, to sort of eyeball, like one per couple, sort of,
Yeah.
so to speak.
What's the usual attendance at town meeting?
First night,
We had,
maybe 500?
yeah, we had
we're
about,
lucky.
I want to say we had about 600 last year.
Yeah, depends
We-
if
we
there's
had
a
We
hot,
had a pretty good turnout at the beginning, at the first
Yeah.
meeting last year. I think a quorum's 150 or 2.
second night, sometimes hard to get a quorum.
Second night is
Depends
certainly
on if
more
there's a
difficult.
controversial subject. Marijuana always gets them out.
It certainly did last year.
I know.
That
So it
and
would just
something
be the
else did
first
too.
night, and, I think 3 people would be good. Anybody else?
I currently have a conflict that I
Okay.
might be able to get out of. I didn't have it on my calendar, shame
Oh,
on
okay.
me.
I better
but-
check
So
my
I currently have a conflict, but I'll try to move it and try to be there. I'd like to be there.
It's a lovely day. It's
So I'll
gonna
have
be a
to let you
lovely
know.
day for town meeting.
What day?
It's
Anything
May
else?
6th. It's Monday, May 6th.
So, I mean, I just have one other thought, which is, a while ago, I read the Easton Community
Yeah.
Preservation Plan, and then I was looking at it again tonight. This is a segue too, right? But I'm thinking, I'm looking at this material and comparing it to stuff that's in there, and of course, it's nowhere near as extensive, but it's like, to me, this is like the little nut that would go inside developing a plan like that. I mean, you guys thought about what needs to be presented in a nutshell to citizens of the town about that, and it seems like a place to start in trying to develop a plan. I mean, some of the principal points are here already.
Anybody else? Okay.
Hip hip hooray.
One other house cleaning thing. Voter Information Committee, pre-town meeting, is having a meeting on Monday, the 22nd. So it's 4/22/19 at 9 AM to 11 AM. Is there anybody here that would be available to go to the voter information?
Do you want me to explain what it is? That wasn't a very good explanation.
Well, yeah, I'm trying not to, I want them to go to it, I want
I
to scare them
know,
from it.
no.
All right, go ahead, Ken, take it.
Okay, so the voter information group every year holds a little forum that's televised where various groups come and present the warrant articles that their organization or group is responsible for. So Community Preservation Committee always addresses the warrant articles that we have on the schedule this year. We only have 8 warrant articles this year. It really is just a matter of 3 or 4 sentences per article, and I'd be glad to write them up for somebody. I just can't, I'm gonna be out of town this year. I've done it the last 2 or 3 years.
Yes, you are.
So, I mean, you just sit here, and it's televised just like it is now, and you just say, warrant article for, restrooms at blah, 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 and then you just say the amount and a couple words about it, and then you move on to the next one. It's not like question, answer, or anything like that. It's just informational to get it on Channel 18 for everyone, so they can get a little more information before they go to town meeting.
Our chairperson isn't volunteering to do that this year?
The chairperson can't.
When is
So-
it again?
It's the Monday after Easter.
22nd, between 9 and 11, here.
So I currently have a conflict, broken record, but I may be able to move it, but I can't tell you tonight if I can
Okay.
or not.
Could you let us know if you can? I mean,
I could if I felt like it, yeah. No, I will let you know. I will let everyone know within the next 3 or 4 days at the latest.
Well, actually, you only have to let one person know, because she's gonna be writing the,
yeah,
Okay, yeah, I'll know within a couple of days.
yeah, let me know, because if you're not, well, let me know
what
if you
about
can.
yourself?
I am out of town.
Okay,
So let me why don't we ask if there's anybody else who is available, just in case I
we
can't.
just did.
Huh?
And now it's you.
So there is no one else available? Okay. All right. I'll see if I can move it.
Thank you,
I might be
Chris.
able to. I didn't move it yet.
No, and I can talk to somebody on the voter information group to see if they can get you like first or second. I know them, so if you want to do closer to 9 and not, or the end.
Yeah, that wouldn't
No, I'm just saying.
really matter.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
But let me know.
I'll let you know.
because I'm leaving town on next Wednesday, so I would need to know before that so I can type
Yeah,
this
I'll
stuff
figure it
up.
out in the next couple of
Okay,
days.
great,
Yeah.
thanks.
Can we take a recess of 5 minutes, please?
Move to recess for 5 minutes.
Second,
All in favor?
aye.
Aye.
Continue. So Chris, you'll contact,
I will. I'll let Kathy know and you within the next couple of days.
Okay, that's great, thank you. Kathy?
In the event that Chris can't do it, shall I just prepare something for somebody from the voter information group to read?
That makes sense.
Okay.
That makes sense.
that
Thank
does-
you. All right. Did everybody go over the grant agreements? That's discussion on policy, that's next. What do we think? To the board. Chris?
Well, I looked through 4 of them, the 2 Harwich, the town of Quincy, and the coalition version. And I thought that was enough. There were a lot of similarities from one to the next. But, you know, by the time I was done, I was pretty convinced that it's probably a good idea. I think it adds structure somewhat painlessly. And my limited observation being here for 8 months or whatever it is that some of the applicants could probably use a little bit more structure. And I think things like time limits and things like that spelled out in a grant agreement would be a good thing. If I was to pick one of the 4 I went through, I mean, one of the Harwich agreements was specifically for affordable housing. So I gravitate more toward the general ones, and I thought the Harwich one was fine. It seemed to cover all the bases. It was clear, simple, and for me, that one works. Quincy's was also really nice and simple. The coalition's was as well, but as I read through them all, if I had to pick one, I would pick the Harwich one. But I think it's a good idea.
Randy?
Huh? Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I'm done. Go ahead. Randy.
Did you review the Quincy documents or from the website or?
I think, Jan, you sent the Quincy document, didn't you, along with
No,
some?
it was on the coalition's website.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, so
That
wherever it was, that's
Yeah,
where I
I read that
found
one
it.
too.
I mean, I just picked Quincy. There were about 5 towns there or something like that. I just picked Quincy because it's a fairly large, city. So that's where I got it.
Anything else, Randy? All set? John?
I did not review them.
Okay. It's all right. You've got plenty of time. Mary?
So I've expressed my thoughts on this before. I do think we should have an agreement with third parties. I have a hard time where most of our applicants are town departments. We are not the contracting authority, and it's even true on some of these other agreements. The Board of Selectmen is technically the contracting authority for the town, so I have a hard time asking the town, having the town sign both sides of an agreement. I do think there are other ways to enforce the town's responsibilities to this committee other than having a grant agreement that is formally signed in the same way that a housing trust one would be signed. Housing trust, I can see it as technically its own legal entity. A third party like Community Development Partnership, third party like Habitat for Humanity, even the housing authority that is technically a quasi-governmental agency that is not a pure subdivision of the town, those I could see. But a conservation commission, the conservation officer, I have a hard time with thinking that those town department heads, because then you have the town is both sides of the agreement, and it just doesn't make sense to me. I think if a town entity is not complying, our remedy is to just pull the funds. And you do that through I think the town administrator has ultimate authority over the town employees, and if the town employees aren't dealing with using the money accordingly, we have the authority to pull that money back if it's not used in a timely fashion. So to me, on the non-entity side, that I think is a smarter thing to go through than having an agreement where the town is suing itself. I think it's a little too much bureaucracy for me personally. It's one person's opinion. That being said, situations like the Housing Trust, a housing authority, community development partnership, other entities, I firmly believe that they should have an agreement. So, maybe not the answer that some people wanted, but I have to,
It's an opinion.
it's an opinion.
Kathy?
I agree with everything that Mary said. I was gonna say the exact same thing. When I reviewed the grant agreements, you know, they're all between the town of, and in our case, it would be the town of. And I don't see the necessity of that. It just doesn't seems like we could put something else in place, but not a grant agreement. But I do agree that anything else should fall under a grant agreement, even the Historical Society, which we've had with them in the past, the Housing Trust. And I do think that the one that the law firm had, which was the Harwich one, was sufficient, of the ones that I looked at.
KP Law.
I thought that one was sufficient. So that's, I agree with what Mary said.
Chris?
Yeah, I really hadn't focused a lot on external versus internal, but having heard what Mary said, I'd be fine with that. I mean, I think that makes sense, actually. I think the grant agreement would work well with external entities, but internal town, I'd be okay with the procedure being other than a grant agreement.
And that procedure would be?
From my perspective, we already have the biannual updates, and we have the authority at those biannual updates to, if we think somebody's going down the wrong line, if we don't think the Aldborough House $2,500 is current use is in line with what was proposed, we have the right at a meeting to rescind.
Changed.
To rescind that.
Rescind it.
So, and I think the same is true of any of the town departments. And, you know, it's rare that we have, it's not the Conservation Commission coming to us seeking funds for a revetment.
I
It's the
understand where you're
Conservation
headed.
Commission
The
on-
problem I'm having is, now that I understand what policies are, how do we put that into place? How do you have a written policy for that?
I think it's easy. We have a written policy that says that grant agreements will be required at the discretion of the CPC, and it will be, in all cases, will be required of third parties, not of town departments, but of third parties. And we can make the decision that a housing trust is while it is a political subdivision of the town, it is technically a legal entity, and we're gonna require it of the trust. We just say it's our discretion. We're the ones that are granting the money. So if we're granting the money, we should have the ability to say that we're gonna require an agreement in a certain circumstance.
Chris?
David, is the issue you're questioning, is it a matter of having something written down beyond whatever is written down today? For example, might be a bad example, but for example, if it is an internal funding approval, you know, do we just make sure that those people have a one-page summary of expectations that maybe they don't formally have today? I don't know, maybe they do, I'm not really sure. But, you know, maybe it's just a matter of everybody having the same set of expectations, including term limits for the funding and, you know, that kind of stuff.
John?
Yeah, I agree with what Chris is saying. I understand your point, Mary, that there's no point in the town suing itself, but you could still strip some of that language out of the agreement and have a version of the agreement for town entities who are grantees. I don't see why that would be a problem. It would be more consistent than just saying at the CPC's discretion, we may decide to impose this if we have an agreement, some version of the agreement that everybody has to sign. It seems to make sense to me.
I got to hold the attorney back in here for a moment. Kathy?
I'm trying to respond.
I think, actually, the coalition addressed something similar to this recently, where they sent out some literature and some samples of agreements, not agreements, but one-pagers, sort of summary-type things that specified more sort of the agreement between, let's say, the town and the Community Preservation Committee. And it kind of like, let's just say, using one page as an example, just kind of broke it down, the funding, the dot, the dot, the dot, the dot, just because very often, if you read the warrant articles, they're a little bit broader sometimes than, than was initially intended. And so unless somebody can go back and find the original application, they don't necessarily know. So I think to have not a grant agreement, but an agreement between the project applicant and the Community Preservation Committee, which sort of spells out our expectations, including the annual reports, the possibility of funds being rescinded if some things aren't being met, et cetera, would be at least a step in the right direction, will give us a little bit more structure than we have now.
So you're including all entities into that?
Yeah, well, I'm including town entities. I think
That's what I
that-
mean by
Yes,
all.
an agreement, but I think a grant agreement, a more formalized grant agreement
With external,
with non-town entities.
so we're gonna have two-part, you're looking at two-part.
So I have
Mary.
a follow-up for you. I think what you actually do, the application is signed by the party to be charged, which is the town department. So that is a contract. It's a unilateral contract, and I think we can put our expectations, the 6 months, our
can't.
ability to,
They can't sign the contract. Town
When-
department can't.
when
Only
the
the Board of Selectmen can.
but it is still technically a representation by a town on behalf of the administration that this is what they're asking for, right? So it's not technically a contract against each other, but it is a representation by a town department on behalf of administration. Administration is generally signed off on the department ones. If your application includes those kinds of expectations, what we're expecting, the money needs to be spent within 2 years. If at any time the commission feels that the money is not being used appropriately, we reserve the right to rescind the funds at a meeting. If we put those kinds of parameters in the application, every applicant is going to see it, they're going to be put on notice, they are signing that document, and you put an acknowledgement that we've read the terms that are part of this application, and we understand and accept those terms as a part of receipt of the money. And then I think you can still put a line in that at CPC's discretion, a more formalized grant agreement may be required, and we can have a sample of the agreement. I think how you change the agreement is you put a scope as an exhibit to each agreement that covers, what the Affordable Housing Trust gets their money for, or what somebody else gets their money for. And then the applicants will see a draft of our standard agreement. It will get amended with each of those kind of third-party people. The application becomes an exhibit to the agreement, and it all goes in one place.
You lost me about 5 sentences ago,
Um,
when you used the word scope.
I'm just curious about something. The agreements are fine.
Yeah.
Now, this isn't my bailiwick, so be patient. How does it fold into a written policy from this board?
I think it's as a part of an application that we've accepted. We amend our application further to put those terms and conditions into the application. The terms and conditions are a condition of, that every applicant understands that when they're applying for money, they're gonna need to comply with coming in every 6 months and giving us an update, that our expectation is that the money will be expended within 2 years, within 3 years of receipt of the money, and receipt of the money could be a September date, it could be a July date, it could be a July date, it could be a May date, depending on whether it's future.
So all that verbiage can be considered a board policy.
You can put that into your application, as a part of your application, as the
Well, I
terms and
think what she's
conditions,
saying is that the application is our policy.
is the policy.
It's our policy. Might not look like the policy, but it's our policy.
So the extra term,
Wow,
the other
so-
terms that you want, you put in that application becomes,
It's a great
The
segue
agreement
into the
between-
application here.
John?
I'm still struggling to understand what you're saying exactly. Because the presumption there, right, is that there is a standardized boilerplate application that everybody's gonna use.
correct.
And that it's gonna have some of the language in it that's in this legal
Correct.
document, because that language is common to both the grant agreement and internal
Correct.
grantees. And then you're gonna, then would this legal document change because,
Nope. Nope, it just becomes a second document.
I'm sorry, sir, I can't answer that
Okay,
question.
all
I'm
right.
not qualified to answer
are
that
you-
question.
well, what does one have to do to be qualified to answer that question?
So.
Have a
so
stamp
lo-
after your,
Oh, I see, okay, I see.
So what would happen, and what I would do if I were drafting a contract, if I was drafting the grant agreement, I would make as an exhibit to the grant agreement the application. That would be one of the exhibits that I would include to a grant agreement between the town and any third-party applicant. And that application is gonna have all of exactly what they asked for. It's gonna have how much money, what they're gonna spend it on. It then becomes part of the agreement with us. It's the representations that they made to this board for why they wanted the money. And a contract just turns those representations into representations and warranties and gives us the right to go back after it if it's not followed through on. But I think for some applications, like a $2,500 Albro House application, the application itself with some terms and conditions is gonna serve our purposes. For something like the Affordable Housing Trust that's getting $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in the last 2 years per year, you may want something that's beefed up a little more, that has the application attached to it, that has the contract language in greater detail. And that all becomes part of the greater contract with the trust. The application would be, in my own opinion, if there's a conflict between the application and the final agreement, the agreement would govern. But that all gets worked out with by lawyers, because that's what contract lawyers do for a living. So,
Okay, so there's a $2,500 Albro House
Yep.
thing, which probably we don't need to worry about too much.
correct.
Then there's, for example, Hinkley's Pond, which is, 20 times or whatever the multiple is a lot more money. And so, but that's town to town, right?
Which is a $700,000 application that was made by the town, by administration,
Right.
who came before us and asked for that money and told us what they were gonna use it for. And to me, it wasn't the Conservation Commission or the harbor master asking for that money. It's a town employee through administration asking for money that we have custody and control of for use for a project that's applicable. And I think in that instance, administration, the contracting authority for the administration is the Board of Selectmen. So the contracting authority on both sides is the Board of Selectmen in that circumstance. And I think our remedies are still the same. We can still, at any point in time, if we thought that money wasn't being used in accordance with the application that was before us, I think we have the right to rescind it
as a policy of the board.
as a policy of the board.
Chris?
Well, one thing I'm not dying to be involved in is an entity that's buried in paperwork.
Agreed.
So, I'm concerned, I think this is all great. I have no serious disagreement with what Mary's been discussing here, but I'm a little concerned. It seems like we're evolving in this discussion to having an application that covers all the bases. And so I guess I'm left with the question, do we need a grant agreement? Are there effectively two applications, one for internal and one for external? And do we need that?
And let this policy sit within,
Yeah, I mean,
The
maybe
application?
it's,
Spell it out with-
maybe, you know. if-
simplify it.
So there's an application, somebody signs it, as Mary pointed out, at the end of the day, the grantee signs it. And if the application includes everything, or almost everything that's critical, that the grant agreement would include, then maybe we don't really need a grant agreement. Side question, I'm curious about where the town grant agreement came from, because it's written for CPC, if I remember correctly. So where did it even come from in the first place? There must have been some perceived need that we needed it for someone to have constructed it.
We've had a
It
grant,
was a request.
yeah, it was a request. We asked.
How long ago did it happen? So who
Or I was
requ-
on the board.
We've been working on this for a while.
So we requested that someone connected, some town attorney, write a grant agreement for the committee. Okay.
For the Affordable Trust, yes.
Well, but there's one that's not affordable trust. There's one
Right,
that's generic,
it's a general agreement.
right,
Right.
which is the one
Yeah.
I was most
Well,
in
we've
favor
always
of.
had grant agreements.
We have.
Yes, we've had them between non-entities. For example, like the Historical Society. I have one right here that says Harwich Historical Society Preserving Harwich's Glass Plate Images Project. And that was several years ago.
Okay.
So when we had, however they do it in the office, write it up, they asked them to sign this grant agreement. Not,
So-
not the library, not, Brooks Academy Museum, but the Historical Society, because they were a non-entity. They're outside of, and this should have been one with South Harwich Meeting House.
So we're talking about implementing a procedure that already exists. It sounds like it already exists.
Yes, can I just segue into one thing?
Go ahead.
Please. Okay, one of the items, agenda items is talking about the application. Okay, so, I brought last year's application, because a lot of people haven't seen it. And, we do have a lot within the application, that specifies a lot of these things that would be included in a grant agreement. About the funding, how they disperse the funds, the obligations, complying with regulations, who signs off on it. We also have a thing that says 3 years from the release of funds, which would be July 2020, this coming year. Might be rescinded automatically, waivers can be sought. I mean, we have a lot of this in here. So, I'm not really sure what else we're looking for. So,
So my only point was that I think particularly for any applicant, if there's information, if there are conditions that we want included, I don't see a reason why we can't include them in the application. It puts the applicant on notice. It's essentially terms and conditions that go with it. It's less formal than an agreement. I do still think, though, that in a situation where you have a third-party entity, I still think we're better off formalizing a more formal contract than just an application. I don't think, I agree with Chris, I don't think we should get buried in paperwork. We wouldn't be doing the paperwork either, though, so, there's certainly a good reason to have a simple, straightforward grant agreement signed. An application would always, in my own mind, be part and parcel of it. Other lawyers may disagree, that's just how I would do it. I would do the same thing anytime I went do an RFP or anything else. Your RFP would always be part of your contract. a supporting document. But
The-
I don't think there's any need to get buried into, I'm not suggesting a, 50-page contract. This grant agreement hits all the high points. It does what it needs to do, and, that coupled with an application that puts people on notice, I think should suffice for us. And I haven't looked at the application since we talked about it last time, so, I'm not saying that there's any, I'm not saying there's 20 pages that we need to add to the application. I'm just saying I
I
think it serves
hear
a
the
purpose.
term codified used all the time. My question again is, can the application, which is an application, be used as a policy of this board? Or do they have to be two different mechanisms?
If we've approved the application and all the terms in the application, I think it serves as a codification of our policies. You certainly can we can try and promulgate rules and regulations of this board if we wanted to, and you,
I'd rather leave that to the next chair.
well, I'm just saying, you're asking the question, so,
No,
conservation.
it's a very simple term
Yes.
to understand.
But to codify a policy is to set up rules and regulations. It is the board version of a bylaw. So
And if this is the application, this would meet that criteria.
that would be that's an application. If you truly want to codify something, then we would promulgate rules and regulations. The Board of Health has rules and regulations. The Conservation Commission probably has rules and regulations that they have promulgated over the years. There's no reason that this commission can't do the exact same thing.
All right, so you're saying no, then? You're saying that the application does not
No,
suffice
that's
as a
exactly right.
policy?
No, I'm saying the application, we've made the determination that those are those are the things that we are gonna hold the applicants to,
Right.
right? We've already made that decision. That's a decision until we change it. Codifying things is a little different in that they are more formal rules and regulations.
Okay.
And it takes more to change those than just, once it's codified as a rule and regulation that is promulgated, it takes further steps to kind of change it than an application.
Chris?
Maybe an approach then, based on all this, could be that we revise as necessary the application to ensure that it includes all of the important terms and conditions that we need.
We deem,
We indicate that if you sign it as a grantee, you are agreeing to those terms. And maybe there's some short piece of language in it that says that for external grantees, the committee and town reserve the right to also require signing of a formal grant agreement. And it could be used with entities, I'm just making this up, it could be used with entities above a certain grant amount. Some entity that's been granted funding into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, you may want a formal grant agreement to go along with the signed application. But some small external entity who's getting a $10,000 funding grant, you may not want to go through all that. And if it's a town entity, then I think we've all agreed that there's no need for a grant agreement, and the application should suffice. And
Well, I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's interesting because the principle, when the application first came through for the Housing Trust, it was based on the Yarmouth model, quote unquote. Well, Yarmouth has a grant agreement with their housing trust.
okay.
That's
So it
the
may-
issue I'm having.
So it could be that if you add language that says we reserve the right to have a formal agreement put in place with the grantee, you don't differentiate between external or internal. And you know that in the vast majority of cases, internals will not have a formal grant agreement, but in some cases, housing trust could be one, you will.
Kathy?
Well, it already says in our guidelines for the application, entities or individuals that are not Town of Harwich departments, agencies, or subdivisions shall have a contract executed with the Town of Harwich for the purposes of implementing an improved project.
What are we arguing about?
I don't know. Because this addresses just the non-entities. I think our chairperson has wanted to include other
Oh.
town entities.
And he's
John.
not looking at me.
To me, it's all about making expectations perfectly clear and ensuring that any grantee, whether they're internal or external, actually has read and digested those expectations so there aren't surprises later down the road. To me, it's important to be consistent and not even allow the appearance of making arbitrary decisions about whether you're going to require somebody to sign this couple-page documents, the primary purpose of which is to simply make expectations clear. Make sure that the grantee understands what's expected of them and what's the consequences are of not meeting expectations. I don't know why we wouldn't do that. And that's what
Through the application.
I mean,
It
in a
doesn't-
way, the argument about whether language is in some boilerplate application or it's a separate document that has to be signed, it's a little, that in itself is a little arbitrary. I don't really care about it. Just as long as whatever the mechanism is, it makes it as easy and straightforward as possible to force the grantee to read and digest all that stuff and understand what they're getting into. That's all.
Mary?
So I just have to say, it's not, the onus is not on us to make the applicants understand. The onus is on them. They have to understand. That's it. And I understand your point.
That's where I come from too, so it's
I understand your point.
point, right.
Yeah, but
And I think by having it detailed in an application, if you're signing an application and we have certain things set forth, that's fine. From a legal perspective, there are a third party, I would want to have a separate formalized contract with them, whether it's 2,000 or 20,000 or 200,000, just because they're a third party and it makes it easier going forward. I don't think that's I still don't think that's necessary for a town department, but
Just for the new members, I've been on this board 3-4 years now, and this has been hammered away and never reached a conclusion. And this is the first time that I can remember listening to valid arguments on the specific topic. I'm beginning to better understand what it is we're trying to do. I haven't got that before. So, Kathy?
Just a point of reference in that, in fact, we usually have no issues with non-entities that we have entered into grant agreements with. We have issues sometimes with town departments that we do not have agreements with. I mean, that's just the way it's been. So that's the problem, I guess, right?
absolutely.
So,
so,
Yes, sir.
I think that goes to my point. It's like, it's trouble for us if people don't digest these things and come back later and say, oh, I didn't know that was the case or something. And yes, I get your point, that it's their responsibility, but still it's trouble for us, right? If they don't live up to whatever written responsibility is. So trying to avoid that as much as possible seems like just a natural and the right thing to do, right? I mean, you can only do what you can do, but you
Right.
still do what you can do.
Lead the horse to water. Chris?
What was that?
Well, just back to Kathy's comment, that's an enforcement issue. I mean, that's an enforcement issue. So if we grant funding to an applicant, we take an extra, and this will take care of what John is talking about as well. We take an extra 30 seconds and say, we want to make sure that you've read all of the terms and conditions in the application and that you understand you're agreeing to them. And then, if they come back after 12 months and say, well, I'm still sitting on the money, I've been sick and I can't do this, we say, well, we're going to take the money back. That's what it said in the terms and conditions, so the money has to come back now. And, I think my major takeaway here is I have to read the application again, which, I read 8 months ago, I guess, but I haven't looked at it since then. So I have to look at it and make sure that it, at least in my mind, it covers everything that it needs to cover. I still think that, really, I don't care whether we require a grant agreement also be signed by every external applicant, or whether it's at the discretion of the committee. It doesn't make any difference to me. I would go whatever way the committee wants to go. But I think what we really have to do is make sure that the application, and this may already be the case, contains all of the T and Cs that people need to comply with. So that's my big takeaway from this meeting is I just need to look back at the application and make sure it looks right, in my mind.
And I need to reread the application myself.
In terms of what? Like, are you afraid you,
I'm not afraid of anything.
no. Are you afraid that, or not afraid, are you concerned that it wasn't specific enough, the application for, are we talking about 2018, this year's?
This year's.
This year's? That they weren't specific enough, or?
Mary?
Did we not have anybody sign contracts this year?
No?
And is that because we didn't ask, because staff didn't ask, because there was turnover and people didn't realize that they should have asked
You're
before
saying
money
for
was dispersed?
non-entities?
No, it's-
Yes.
yeah.
I mean, the only one I can think of was like CDP.
I asked him that, and he said they just didn't, so.
Randy?
But the monies got dispersed.
It would seem to me it might simplify things a little bit if when an application came in, a member of the committee was assigned to that application to sort of shepherd the whole process through before it comes to the committee. It might, eliminate a lot of confusion if somebody was on the committee understood exactly what they were doing and sort of a one-on-one representative with the applicant before it even got to the full committee.
It's a thought.
Yeah, we've talked about that, or something similar to that.
How many applications the last couple of years? What was the highest number?
16,
16 was last year.
yeah.
So, Mary?
Do we have, just someone on this committee, because I don't know, the procedure for us dispersing the funds? After town meeting, we go through this process before town meeting, it goes to the selectmen put it on the warrant,
Town meeting approves it.
town meeting approves it, what then are the
Next
procedures?
step in that case is, they write a letter, or they approach, they send an invoice for the money
They who?
to
The
whoever the application is.
After
whoever the
July
applicant is, and goes to Carol, goes to the finance director. She looks at it, she looks at the numbers, and
Okay, and then a check is cut?
then a check is cut
So,
When it's signed off by
by me, well, the chair.
chairperson of this committee.
Committee,
Yeah.
right.
so to me, the extra step in it is just that we need a standard contract that can be put in front of that group that goes with their invoice, and they perhaps shouldn't get their check until they have signed off. And that contract goes to the Board of Selectmen, and the Board of Selectmen sign off on behalf of the town. My understanding is from sitting at selectmen's meetings, the town administrator has signing authority for anything under $25,000, so,
That was 50.
or 50,000, whatever it is. And so anything under that amount, he can sign on the Board of Selectmen's behalf. Anything over that would require the Board of Selectmen to actually sign off on it. And we could always, I don't see a reason that we couldn't request, if that's the route that this board wants to go, that the money doesn't get dispersed unless, really unless the applicant has returned a signed contract and Board of Selectmen has signed the contract. When the invoice comes in,
Yeah,
there's a
but
procedure that has to go.
I just
be
don't
gone
think,
through.
our problem hasn't been with the non-entities.
I understand that.
So I don't feel like we should just add another layer of
Mm-hmm.
stuff to signatures and all this kind of stuff. Our problem hasn't been with the non-entities.
Well, my only concern is that at some point we were doing contracts, and why did we get away from them? And it may have just been turnover, and you know,
Right.
we got dropped at some point, and that's fine. We haven't suffered any real consequences for it. But if that's our policy,
Yeah, well, I just say, I've been doing this for like 7.5, almost 8 years, and I have to say that the level of accountability has gone from here to here in that time period, in terms of our involvement, which has been great,
fantastic.
okay? So, this I see as sort of another level. I'm not sure that everything that we're talking about is gonna, you know, address that.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes, ma'am.
is it really just Chris's point then that we need to start enforcing our own kind of policies?
We don't have one.
Well, but you do.
I've got this board has applications.
Yep.
We don't have a
So
policy.
I get it, but the application, if the application says those things, that's the application, that's what they've signed. They've been put on notice for that. Even if it's not a formally promulgated rules and regulations, that application says,
Right.
this is what we've said, these are the terms and conditions of you that we're requiring for you to get the
There are
money.
policies and procedures.
I understand that.
So if that's the case, and we put them on notice, and that's what they've signed, even once it's voted, we still have the right to rescind, and if we have the right to rescind, then perhaps we need to use that more frequently. When and if we're having problems, to Kathy's point, if we're getting more, if people are more accountable now because they're coming in twice a year and doing those things, then fine.
Chris?
If part of our enforcement problem or our lack of enforcement problem has been that we haven't been getting signatures on applications, that should be really easy to fix.
No, we get them now.
Get them.
We get them now.
Okay.
We didn't know.
I thought I
it was-
heard earlier that we had a problem with that still, but maybe I misunderstood. So,
Kathy?
I just throw one thing in about the Affordable Housing Trust. One of the reasons that the Community Preservation Coalition strongly recommends that committees have a grant agreement with Affordable Housing Trusts is because certain language can be put in it, like, for example, X amount percent cannot be spent, no more than, say, 10% can be spent on administrative or operating costs, which protects what our, intent was, which was to, preserve most of the money for certain projects. And the other thing is that a direction that they choose, like say the Affordable Housing Trust chooses to pursue, buy downs and a vouchering system versus purchasing land acquisition and development. They're two different things. We need to kind of know that. It would influence things.
I'm curious, how would that be affected if the housing trust came before CPC and asked for a grant for $6 million to borrow the money?
How would it affect it?
Yeah.
You mean in terms of, it would go through the same process, wouldn't it? I mean, we would decide whether it was something we wanted to approve. We would have to be willing to, put it to the town voters to do a whole debt exclusion, not a debt exclusion, but a borrowing against
Borrowing.
something, yeah. which has been done.
I'm trying to speak to that, but to Kathy's point, I think I don't consider the trust a town entity. It is a quasi-town entity, but they have the ability to buy and sell land. They have ability to all those things outside of the scope of the Board of Selectmen. So they have autonomy when it comes to affordable housing. So to me, they are an entity that we should have an agreement with. To Kathy's point, at this point, we have given them money, and the only restriction we have put on that money to date was last year 40,000, this year 30,000, going to be dedicated to the housing coordinator or the community development partnership to do the housing coordinator scope of work. Other than that, we have given them straight money to use as they see fit. Kathy is not wrong. We may, in future years, want to put something like a limit on, we only want, it may go to a point where they hire somebody. We only want X amount to go towards administrative costs. We only want, we don't want to use more than 50% for land acquisition versus building. There are any number of restrictions that there may come a time that we want to talk about and discuss. You don't know what proposals are going to come up and how much money they're going to look for. And there are other communities that do their affordable housing differently. I believe we were told that Provincetown takes 50%, has voted at town meeting to take 50% of their CPA money and dedicate it towards affordable housing.
Right.
So, those proposals may all come up at some point, so
Yeah.
we may be dealing with significantly different dollars than we are now. I still think
Right.
500 and 300 is a lot of money annually, but someday it could be the $6 million that you're looking at. And I personally don't consider, other people may disagree, I don't consider the trust to be a pure town entity, because the Board of Selectmen is not their contracting authority. The trustees are the contracting authority for the trust. So, to me, that's where your delineation would come in. You have two different people on either side of the signatures.
Chris?
But if someone comes in with a project plan that supports their application, and we consider the project plan to be deficient, or conversations with the applicant lead to revisions that are necessary, I'm assuming we can send them back to redo the application. I mean, they're in the door, we've let them in the door, but if an application needs to be revised to probably mainly be more specific, somebody comes in with an application that doesn't
We
have
did
enough
that last year.
That's already taken
Okay,
place.
okay, that's what all right,
We did
fine.
that last
So
year.
we have no issue with that. So so that gives us the ability to end up with an application that is precise and that can therefore be approved. You
Right.
know, it may have to go through revisions, but if it's complicated, that may be okay. And then, still, if we had language in the application that said we reserve the right with any entity, we don't even have to distinguish between internal and external if we don't feel like it, to require a formal grant agreement be signed beyond this application, then that lets us do that if we want to.
Mary?
I think that was my point of saying we reserve the right to require a contract at our sole discretion. I mean, then we can decide
Yeah.
if it becomes necessary. But to your point about changing the application, we kind of even did that for Brooks Academy Museum this year.
Yeah,
By the way, we drafted the motion
Right.
and restricted the use of the money.
Right.
So, so to me, that motion would be part of that
Yeah.
kind of change.
John?
Okay, I'm just gonna say what I've already said, and I'm gonna say it again, which is, I think it's important to be consistent and not arbitrary. And we can all look at each other and decide we're all reasonable people, and we think we understand, you know, how we as a group would react to an applicant and how we would decide whether they need an agreement. 2 years from now, however, it's gonna be a different board. And They may be more exacting, less exacting, and so consistency is gonna suffer. And people who are applying a couple of years from now may get a different treatment. I think it's a good idea to set up a very consistent process that the board has to willfully change as a group rather than making case by case, potentially very arbitrary choices as you go down. And so I just don't favor the notion of leaving it as a case-by-case decision. Are these guys gonna have to sign an agreement? I don't know why you wouldn't just put in place a well-defined process that everybody has to follow.
I agree with
You could do that too. You know, you could say, I mean, part of it could involve the difference between internal and external, and, you know, if affordable housing has to be classified as external, then there's real sound logic in doing that. You could also add a minimum grant amount that requires an agreement. If it's an external entity and they're getting a $5,000 grant, do you really need them to sign a grant agreement? Maybe you do, but maybe you don't. But you can take care of that with things like minimum grant amounts. So there may be 4 or 5 things that could govern that process.
I've talked enough.
anybody else.
Me too.
All right, so where do we go from here? What's the pleasure of the board?
May I say, I think your next thing is your application that Kathy is sitting there looking at. So I think we look at the application and decide, you know, take a look at it, read it, and maybe
Pass
come
this
back
down.
next time
All the way down.
and just with
All the
some
way down.
suggested changes.
Well,
No,
If
no,
they
no,
need
no.
Yes,
All the way
ma'am.
down. She's doing it one by one.
I don't know.
So
did I
here,
do-
what are
did I
you
give
doing?
any-
Well, he-
All the
Randy-
way
No.
down. One packet, it has 2 sections all the way down.
Both hands,
Oh, okay.
here's yours.
There you go. That's yours. This is mine.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay, I missed that. Sorry.
For you,
Section 1,
Dan.
section 2.
None for me.
No, because it's just,
That's
it's,
okay,
we're just
that's
working on
okay.
this, it's not, you know.
I don't
Well,
have section
Could
2.
you email me that? Because I think it's in
Oh,
the tab.
sorry.
I think it's
This
tucked
is-
there.
Certainly do.
Yeah, the problem is that this is in the original application that was done last year
It's online.
was online, but you can't make corrections to it.
That's okay.
So,
I'm just gonna have it in the minutes and
Right.
I'll link it from there.
and I've requested of the person who did it for them to make it available for me to make the corrections. But they are not available at the moment, so when they are available, they will do that. So in the meantime, I just took the last year's and I, you know,
Is it just right protected or is it a PDF that isn't editable?
it's just not editable.
The PDF?
Yeah.
Okay.
I just couldn't get into
Yeah,
it.
no,
to
I've
do
Can you
it.
email it to me?
There is a Word
Can you
document.
email it
Yeah,
to
I can
me?
It's
email
right
to
on
you.
the
Because then I
website.
can
It's on the
convert it.
website.
It's on the
Right
website,
on the website.
but I couldn't,
I should be able to download it and
Yeah.
then convert
well,
it.
the one on the website, yeah,
No, I think it's right there. I've
Right.
looked at.
right.
It's just having the right,
Yeah, I couldn't,
it's just having the
I
right.
couldn't do it, so I
password,
had to
so.
request.
All right,
Chris,
let me look at it tomorrow.
Just ask the question, do we need a motion that says directionally where we're going here? Granted, this is one step, or does the motion have to follow a review of this? And we've had a long discussion about,
I think you
Where
need
we
to look
think-
at the
I
application
think it's,
first.
the review would be,
Okay.
in- just so everybody's on the same page.
fair enough.
So we'll bring that up under,
And,
We're on discussion of application.
right, but for next, for our next meeting.
okay, so, you know, perhaps, can I make a suggestion?
Yes, ma'am.
Perhaps we don't want to use the word guidelines, perhaps we want to use something stronger,
Terms and conditions.
because guidelines kind of leaves us a little, you know, iffy, so we can change that
Right.
if so you know, if we're so inclined. Terms and conditions, I like that. Sounds more formal.
Legalese again.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm just saying, it's just a thought,
No, put it in there, come on.
okay, and, One thing I had a question on was, well, two things. One was the affordable housing table that we had included last year. This is under the first section, which is mostly from the coalition. But we had included a 2018 affordable housing low-income limit.
I saw that somewhere.
I don't know if that's current, or if we should update it. I'm not really sure why we had that in there, but
I think it's good information.
Where is it, Kathy?
it's
So
on,
Second to last page.
it's under the section 1, so,
Yep,
section 1, and it's page 4.
I see it, I see it, yeah.
Okay. Yes, it may be information, Mary, but this is our application. I'm not sure that it is necessary for.
Well, is this really
This is criteria.
This is criteria,
Not really
right?
it's whether your project
Is allowable.
is allowable. So I'm not, I don't know. That's,
Well, from this, I would think this is something that the housing coordinator could tell us whether it's updated or not, if
Okay.
we wanted to keep it
and
in.
I will talk to them about that.
Um,
Who's the housing coordinator?
Community
Oh,
Development
C-
Partnership, yeah.
Partnership.
Okay. Okay.
So they're here every Thursday.
Yeah, all right. I know Andrea's email. I'll ask her.
Yeah, it's Andre, and there's another woman that's been coming in on Thursdays
Okay.
as well.
All right, so that I will double check on.
What's the second one?
I'm thinking, thought there was something else. Maybe there wasn't anything else. The thing is on the last page of the application, or the second to last page, where we have them sign as chief executive officer, basically, they're just saying that they attest that the information contained in this application is true and accurate. Perhaps we should change that to read something more forceful,
I would.
okay? Open to suggestions.
Well,
I mean, because we don't want to, I mean, yeah, we want it to be truthful, we want this to be more binding.
It should say something to the effect of that, by signing below, the applicant is, in applying for funds, the applicant is agreeing to comply with all terms and conditions set forth in this agreement and in the, you know, the policies and procedures
All
of
right,
the
you
community
draft me
development,
up a
yeah.
line and
and
send it to me.
and that the person signing has the
All right.
authority
Mary,
to
would
sign.
you draft me up a line or two that I can
Yep.
add to the application and
Yep.
tell me where you'd like to see it? And if I should take out the, how do you say that word, attestation?
No, that's fine, but yeah, I'll give you,
Okay.
I'll beef it up a little.
All right, that'd be good.
Yeah, because you want a certification that they're gonna comply
Yes.
with the terms and conditions, and we've got terms and conditions set
And
forth.
if we want a line in there about reserving the right to require a
Yeah.
contract between this entity and the CPC. So, can you draft me up 2 lines?
I can do that.
Thank you.
What I would also,
Is that coming out of admin funds?
no,
Asking?
because I couldn't do that even if I wanted to. I'm a town employee, I
Well, that's-
couldn't have 2 contracts with the town.
Why would you ask
Well,
that?
someone's been reading the ethics,
Someone
I
who's
thought
lived
she
it
was
for a
just
very long
volunteering to
period
do
of her
that
life.
as a member of this committee.
Yes, you'll get a little free legal work, but I'm not approving the contract as to form, and I would still suggest that you ask town council to approve everything. There you go, you wanted me
Okay.
to say it?
Just looking for a couple of lines, I'm not looking for real legal stuff.
yeah,
Just the hook of the whole
Doesn't
thing,
really
Kelly,
have
but
to
that's
be.
okay.
doesn't really have to be anything binding.
Well, no, I want it to be more binding than it is, but not, you know.
So just as it might just be me, the opening on where we've got the applicant information,
Where are you?
on,
This is where I'm gonna bring this discussion to an end. Everybody read the applications, we'll
Okay.
discuss
Okay.
this the next time we come in.
Okay,
that works.
okay.
Yep.
Okay, discussion, details, possible June 13th, 2019 CPC public hearing.
Have we booked this room for the public hearing already?
It's a regular meeting schedule.
Okay.
Did I say that right?
I think we hadn't decided if we were gonna definitely do it in June, but I think we
I
had,
think we should do it in June.
I do, I agree.
I agree.
And I think perhaps when the chair gets up at town meeting to speak,
She's been
to
after
all
me
the-
for,
no, when you get up to, at town meeting to speak about all of the applications, I think you also take that opportunity to
Right.
remind those viewers and those in the room that there is a public hearing and
Right.
we are looking for participation to tell us what the town wants to spend the money on.
Mary, give me a date.
June,
Let the board decide the date.
we decided the date, wasn't it June, didn't you just say it was June?
I-
Public hearing?
Yeah.
It's the same as our meeting, our
On,
June meeting.
I thought we just said that.
that's what the board wants.
June 13th.
I wasn't aware of that.
Do we need a motion?
I'd like a motion.
I move that we have a public hearing on the June meeting.
June
of the-
13th,
On
2019.
June 13th, 2019, on the regularly scheduled meeting time for the Community Preservation Committee
At 6 PM.
So
at 6
prior
PM.
to the regular meeting, right? Or
We-
is it, we call
I
it
think
during
it's
the
part
meeting?
of the public, I think it's part of our,
Okay.
I think the first agenda item on our.
We
thing.
open the meeting as a regular meeting, then we go to the public meeting, and we open the public meeting, and we have the public meeting, then we close the
Okay.
public meeting and go back to our
Yes.
regular meeting.
I
So,
second that, John.
Great.
All those in favor?
Aye,
Aye.
And it's done.
and the chair can point out the date and time at the town meeting.
Correct.
Because you will be there on May 6th, I know you will.
Right.
I have no choice.
I know that,
Okay,
frankly, neither do I.
anything else under other?
I have something.
Okay. Kathy?
Sorry.
Go Kathy,
Okay.
don't listen to him.
No, I'm not gonna. This is a note that when I was reviewing the minutes, the committee had asked for some more clarification on the Historic Commission application from 2016. So
Okay.
I brought it with me, so that,
I've never seen it, so
you've never seen it?
I've never seen it.
Okay.
Sorry, what was it again?
Okay, so remember we had our discussion when Mary was representing the Historic Commission, and we were talking about the 2016 $20,000 that had been allocated and hadn't been spent yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, remember that conversation?
It was riveting.
Right,
yes,
yes. And she said that they wanted an opportunity to perhaps, look into some of the records themselves, blah, 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 and we were like,
Yes.
that was all in the minutes, but anyway.
Yes.
So there was a note that we wanted to review the application, so here it is.
Oh, did we take that money back yet?
No,
Nope.
Okay.
she's
You
coming
gave
to
me
us next
till-
month,
You gave me until
May.
May. So,
So, the title of the project was Continued Update of Town Historic Property Inventory for $20,000. And I'm not gonna read you the whole thing, but it says that a partial inventory of historic properties in Harwich was started more than 10 years ago. That was an article from 2006. Little progress was made until 2014, da-da-da-da. And what they completed. So then, this year's application for CPC funding is to focus in more detail on one or more clusters from the list described above. The HDHC will be responsible for prioritization of areas to be studied in greater detail. Possible locations include Bank Street in Harwichport, Captain's Row in West Harwich, and/or the intersection of Main Street and Depot Street in North Harwich. Specific tasks may include completion of historical narratives per structure within identified clusters for addition to MACRIS which is an acronym, or further historical description of a cluster as a whole. So,
So I will say that that is different than solving the problem that we have identified.
okay, so that's good to know.
It is good to know because I have never, there was discussion that people thought we were supposed to focus on clusters.
Would
Excuse
you
me.
like my water?
No, I'm fine,
You
thank
sure?
you. Just give me a second. There was talk about, at some point that that they thought they would focus on clusters, but I didn't realize that that's exactly how it was detailed.
All right. Would you like
I'd love a
this?
copy of that.
Well, this is my only copy, but why don't you take it and give it back to me next month? Okay,
I'll-
when you come back to us?
I'll scan it tomorrow and I will,
Okay, thank you. All right, that's it.
Okay,
I can
That
get
was
it back to
helpful.
you, thank
Thank
you.
You
Kat.
wanted to know?
yeah.
I have never seen it.
Okay, is there anything else? Anything else that the board? Chris?
Just two quick things. Somebody sent us the warrants, Jan, I think. I read them, they sound great.
I sent them from the selectmen's agenda, the pages from the agenda packet prior to anything that was changed after the selectmen and the finance saw it.
I just wanted to acknowledge that I got it, I read them, and I thought they sounded great. And the second thing is, at some point, it doesn't have to be tonight, and maybe it's outside the context of this meeting discussion, but when I was appointed for a one-year term. So I'm 2/3 of the way through that, and I have no clue what governs whether I stay or go.
I can follow up if you want.
This is like a landmine, but go ahead, Mary.
You don't have to talk about it tonight, I'm just bringing it up, because pretty soon, the last 1/3 is gonna be expired.
What traditionally has happened is that you're a selectman's appointment,
Yes,
so if you're up for renewal, the Board of Selectmen generally sends a letter and asks if you are still interested in serving.
okay.
If they're, and then you
So they
would
know
get-
that I'm up for renewal, they're tracking it somehow.
Then they should know that you're up for renewal. You can always reach out to Sandy Robinson.
Okay, fine,
She's usually the one that puts those letters together.
that's good enough for now.
Just to add my comment, I believe I'm in the same boat, which puzzles me a little, because but when I see the list of members here and in the Conservation Commission, it says it expires June 2019, so.
But you're different. And I'm different too.
so-
Because we are representatives of our own committee when our appointments expire this year. So my appointment, I think, expires with my term on the planning board. So I will be up for renewal on the planning board, so I will get a letter from the planning board about my planning board seat. And then planning board would need to vote at our organizational meeting in July as to whether I'm still the representative of the planning board. We do the same thing for historic. Bob Doan, we voted him on historic. He was voted as our representative at our organizational meeting, so he'll serve. And then when his term is up on his underlying board,
So I just need to follow up with,
They'll contact you.
is your conservation up to
yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
It's-
so-
I'm not gonna say anything.
the same thing?
Kathy?
I was just gonna say, if you were fulfilling a term that was vacated for some reason, you know, that may have something to do with,
I don't
like, for
know.
example, you're on conservation, correct?
Yeah.
So Walter Diggs was our conservation person for a long time. Perhaps he had a 3-year term, he only went a year and a half, it was vacant for 9 months, you're fulfilling the rest of that term. But according to the CPC bylaws, the majority of our terms are for 3 years, according to the bylaws.
Maybe it's because the person whose the person whose appointment I replaced
might have been, I don't
Dan's
know
work
the
might have
details
left
of that,
partway
but
through. Maybe
I've
there's
read
only-
the bylaws several times.
what's been discussed on the at the selectmen's meeting, and kind of makes sense, is that if you're a representative of an underlying board, we're all, those of us that are representatives of planning and real estate, open space, and conservation, recreation, where you can't be an ex officio member of a board if you're not still on that underlying board,
Of course,
right? So,
Of course.
so I think that's why some of those have been, that's why, like my term, I think, changed when I went from being the housing commission, the housing committee person to the planning board person. I think I had 2 more years on the housing committee, and now I'm up this
You're
year because
finishing
I
up
switched.
right, his
because
term.
I'm finishing up
Right, I
Jim's.
understand that,
So,
but that doesn't explain the 3-year.
There's 6 of us that are up in 2019.
Oh, wow.
And that does not address the staggering issue.
no, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't at all.
No.
I wonder if it's because of our underlying board that if we're all on the
That
same
is-
expiration
It
date.
does not,
That has nothing to do with
nothing to do with it.
This is from the town, not
it.
me.
Right.
When I first did historic, I was told, when we first elected Joe Powers as historic, I was told that it was we should only be electing for 1 year and being electing year to year. And I think that's
That's
what
not
we
in the
did.
bylaws, though.
I get that. I get that.
So just out of curiosity's sake,
But we all have different terms on our underlying boards too, so
We don't, in real estate open space, we don't have terms.
you don't, you're just,
we do.
We're just
Recreation
members.
does. We're 3
We're
years.
just members at large.
really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I mean, we have a term
For-
that's confirmed by the selectmen.
Right.
But we don't have, you know what I'm saying? We don't, is that what you meant?
Well, you would be appointed for 3 years to real estate and open space, wouldn't you? So then when you're reappointed to real estate and open space, you would then be available to be reappointed for a 3-year term on this.
Mm-hmm.
But if you vacated your real estate and open
Oh,
space,
of course,
right?
of course,
Right.
that's a given.
So I
That's
wonder
not
why
what I
we're-
have an issue with, so.
But like, I wonder if, David, when do you expire on recreation? Do you expire on recreation this year too?
It's never expiring.
No, he doesn't, I know that, but
I don't honestly know the answer. I don't remember.
I didn't know some of mine were expiring until I got the letter in the mail in the end of May for June reappointments.
Can I address Mary for a quick question?
Yeah.
Mary, the term ex officio, okay? When I looked up ex officio, it means non-voting, but that's not really what it means here. So could you explain to me what that means
So-
legally?
So sometimes an ex officio member isn't a voting person because you serve, of course, if the town administrator served on the board because he was town administrator. I would refer to these positions as ex officio just because I consider my seat ex officio to the extent that I serve because I'm a member of the planning board. So the planning
Okay.
board has appointed me, so my role is to be the planning board's representative. So, I mean, maybe it's more
Good catch.
quasi ex
I missed
officio
that.
because
That's okay.
Because you have voting
because we have
privileges.
voting privileges because of the way the CPC committee was set up and chartered. Like it says, there will be a member of the real
Correct.
estate, there'll be a member of recreation. So, but I would still consider it
He's coming
somewhat,
back for an update.
Do you-
ex officio means by the
Yeah, that's true,
office,
yep.
so
Yeah, do
it's
you-
really by the
Do you
underlying
know
board.
if there are many committees in town here that have ex officio positions, aside from this one?
Trying to think. I don't, certainly the Housing Trust, which is not a committee, but they have a member for the selectmen, they have a member.
Right, but
and
other,
Chris, I don't think there are.
Hmm.
Like
What's-
Housing Authority,
We're all except for 2.
this whole committee is ex officio, that's what
Right.
she was
Except
just
for-
saying.
Right.
Because we serve at the
because of our
Because we
position on our underlying board.
Right,
Right.
exactly.
But, like Housing Authority has, a state representative, and then,
2 lines.
and they have elected members. So, but I don't know that there are any others. I don't know, does Rec and
Two of the,
Youth?
two of the board members here are not. This expressly appointed by the Board of Selectmen,
Right.
so they're not.
And that's Chris's, I know Chris has a selectman
right,
seat.
right.
And we still have a vacancy in the selectman
That's
seat,
correct.
correct?
Yep.
I don't know, Rec and Youth doesn't have an ex officio
I am.
seat. No, I
Oh,
mean,
no, on
on the
the
Rec
board?
and Youth
No,
Commission itself,
no.
you're all appointed.
Right, we're all.
I don't know that there are any others,
That's what I thought.
just trying to think.
Okay. Next meeting's agenda points. We're gonna go over the discussion of the,
It's after town meeting?
yeah,
It's not town meeting week, is it?
no,
I think it's the week after.
we're gonna go over the discussion of the,
Town meeting,
Huh,
Our
it is town
meeting.
meeting week.
It is town meeting week.
it is.
That's really nice.
yes, it is.
You're right.
Would anybody want to entertain postponing it a week? I mean, no, Beacon with bells on, but
You guys wanna make a motion, then?
Yeah, but we need to discuss, like, we need to approve, like, the public, hearing,
Well, that's
you
the,
know,
yeah,
flyer and stuff like that, so I don't,
could I suggest we keep it short and sweet for a meeting? Perhaps maybe not talk about the applications?
we have to take
we
that
have
off then.
to, because we
it's a
said
short
in our
meeting.
brochure
Yeah,
that they'd be
yeah.
available July 1.
Right,
Okay,
So, I don't wanna wait until June,
no,
so,
okay. We'll have some changes ready to look at.
so Thursday, May 9th.
Yippee,
let's hope, well, town meeting will
Monday.
definitely go 2 nights.
it's gonna go 2 nights.
If
I'm
you're-
sorry.
If you're soliciting agenda items for the next meeting.
Go ahead, sir.
I want to talk about moving this process to paperless. I think it's a little nuts to be requiring a dozen copies. I think it should all be soft copies. Now, let's not get into a conversation about that right now, but I think we need to talk about moving in that direction. And I'd like to see it as an official agenda item, so we
Okay,
do
would you
talk
jot
about
that
it.
down for me, please? Okay, you've got it.
That's covered.
Anybody else?
So we'll talk about the results of town meeting, right?
We'll keep it brief.
Yeah, we don't,
Historic will be back to see you. He will likely be,
That's right.
and
You're-
I
you're-
suspect, based on the application,
You're June.
we will not, I thought we were May. I
No,
thought Kathy just said we were
Ginny's-
May.
no, I thought Jeannie was,
Library is May.
Oh,
and
and-
you are June.
she's June?
You can
Oh.
come, I'm just saying you were
I'll be here
scheduled.
anyway.
What does that mean, the library is made?
We asked the
Yeah,
library
we
to come
wanted
back to discuss
invoice.
the Rogers sculptures.
Ah,
We asked tonight for Albro House, then we asked the next month for the sculptures, and then I guess June was, but if you would like to move up on the agenda, you should tell somebody.
I haven't heard a word, so.
Could be fast and,
Could be fast.
Yeah.
I have a historic meeting next
I
week.
think
I
it'll be
still
highly
haven't heard
challenging.
anything
We'll talk.
from who?
to move up on the agenda.
Oh, I mean,
Is there a request?
I'm the chair of the, but I'm not the representative either, so
Oh,
Mr. Dona's not here. We have a
Right.
historic meeting
That's
next
right.
week, so,
that's right. Thank you for correcting me.
so. I'm the planning representative.
That's right. Yes, you are.
I'm trying to shuffle the hats.
Anything you need.
Well, just suggestion, if they wanna move the meeting, delay it a week, if they make the details of the planning, planning the public hearing tonight, if you do that tonight, you could delay everything and make a week. Just saying. That's why it was on tonight.
Go ahead, present it.
Oh, I was just saying that if you all wanted to change, delay the May meeting a week and get out of the town meeting week for another meeting. If you finish tonight's agenda item of making the plans for the public hearing, that gives a bracket of time enough to happen for the June meeting. The details for
Does
the
it
public
give you
hearing.
enough time, though,
I don't know,
Jan?
I don't know what you'd like, and if you date out what you want for the public hearing. There's that time problem. We're
Right.
legally obligated to do certain things for a public hearing. We have to have enough time to do it.
Right.
So if you spell out what you want to do tonight, we would have enough time.
We just need to get it published. I mean, I think we picked a date already,
Right.
Right?
so I don't think there's
And-
anything.
Then we already
Are there
already
any
have the
other
room.
details? Do you want to just do what we did last year? Follow that same procedure?
We just need to comply with the legal requirements
Right,
for
right.
publication. So we have to draft up the,
She,
yeah, we just have to draft up that same ad.
I would do what you did last year, and,
Okay.
you know, your chairperson can review it.
And mostly, it's those people sitting in those chairs, if they decide to come, it's their meeting, so.
Makes sense.
So that goes to Jan's suggestion. Do we want to postpone the meeting? Do we want to push it out another week because we're going to be at town meeting for a couple nights, some of us?
I don't care. I'll do whatever the board's pleasure is. I'm gonna
I'd
be here
rather,
for 2
I'd rather
nights
stick
anyway.
to the current schedule.
Okay.
So
Okay, we're sticking to the current schedule then.
stay the 9th.
Yeah.
Okay.
Get a night off, I mean, come on.
Oh, we get Wednesday night off.
Mary
Is
doesn't
there
think
anything
it's very
else?
funny, but whatever.
Chris?
I have one final motion that we applaud Mr. Pond's efforts on the committee since this is his last meeting.
Oh,
Absolutely.
You done? Oh,
no, oh, yes, because of your election is in May.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, it's after our May 10th meeting. You could come May 10th.
His enthusiasm for that is
You
overwhelming.
can see that.
Kathy?
Thank you for being here.
yeah, thank you.
I already thanked him for his service, so.
It's a pleasure serving.
We'll see you out in the woods at some point in time.
That's right.
So does that mean we're going to have
Or at the local
another
restaurants.
person from
Yeah.
housing?
Yeah, they have to elect them. They are going to elect another person from housing. So,
Big shoes to fill.
absolutely. And you
Alright.
get to take your plaque with you.
Yeah.
He's thrilled, you can tell.
Actually, what they mean is.
You get to take your name.
Your name, not
No,
the,
he's
She's not giving you the,
greedy about it or selfish.
right.
But
that's all you get.
That's all you
That's all you
get.
get.
this is nice.
That's funny.
Put it on the back of my
What you get
truck.
after,
There you go.
Insult
what
to
you get after
injury.
8 years of service.
That's right.
Don't let the door hit you.
All right, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're done. Thank you very much, folks.
Anybody.